Christopher Nolan's first war film unsurprisingly plays with narrative structure as it tells the story of the evacuation of thousands of Allied soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk. It's a different beast from Nolan's other work, so let's see how we fare. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Bang, boom, muffled explosion sounds.
This is a movie podcast, and we are wrapping up Christopher Nolan's season. We've been doing a bunch of his films, including Oppenheimer, for the release of Oppenheimer, and this is the last one on our trip. It's his newest film that we're doing, aside from Oppenheimer itself, and that is Dunkirk, which came out in 2017 and is based on the real evacuation of Dunkirk in, I believe, 1940.
Yes, although you did say newest film he has. Newest film that we're doing for this show specifically.
That's what I said. I said newest film that we're doing.
Oh, okay. The way you phrased that, it made it sound like he hasn't put out anything since this.
No, Tenet came out, but that's a sci-fi movie, so that's over on the sci-fi podcast. In fact, me and Tara did that when it came out.
Yep.
It's there. You go check it out. It's it's exciting and full of intrigue. But no, so Dunkirk obviously is a war movie. It is a film that Nolan had been wanting to make apparently since the 90s. I did a little bit of looking.
Yeah.
And, he was inspired to do something like this when he travelled the Channel. The Channel, for those who are not familiar with it, is just the water between England and France. I feel like...
Thank you.
Yeah, but I feel like people in other parts of the world may not know that.
Oh, yeah, no. As soon as you say channel, I'm immediately thinking, like, I'm sorry, is that like the Mississippi? My American mind can't comprehend this body of water you're speaking of.
So, you know, he apparently was inspired. Apparently, at one point, he even wanted to do a improvised film, which I don't know how that would have worked with all the action stuff, but...
He would have... Yeah, I was going to save this joke, but I feel like it works here. Christopher Nolan would have actually antagonized Germany, purposely lost a battle, and then just filmed everybody's reactions as he was evacuating.
He would have just recreated the conflict from scratch.
Absolutely, because we all know how this man loves his practical effects.
So, yeah, I remember like not being sure what to feel getting into this, because I was a big Christopher Nolan fan by this point. Obviously, going into Dunkirk, it was this very different film. It was a historical war film. It was very different to everything else he'd done up until that point. It had mostly been science fiction, thriller, or Batman. That was his repertoire at that point.
The three movie genres.
So the trailers looked great, though. Like, they looked very visually compelling. It looked like it was going to be a real sort of on the ground war movie. And sure enough, this film does not have scenes in a war room with like people in charge making the big choices. It's not that at all. It is the people who are there in the water, in the Spitfires, or indeed on the beach and trying to evacuate it. That's who we're following the entire time. Or I guess a couple of civilians as well, because part of the story of Dunkirk, if you're not familiar with it, is that a lot of civilian ships and boats went to help evacuate Dunkirk when there was no military ships either left or they were saving them for future battles, so they didn't want to commit to sending the destroyers to go and deal with it.
I was going to say, little did they know, but they still had another 5 years in the war, and the U.S. had yet to join, so...
Yeah, what was another year before Pearl Harbor?
Yep, December 7th, 41.
Yeah, so over a year still till Pearl Harbor. Yeah, it's... I think at one point, I misremembered the year, and I thought it was like 1944, and I thought, you know, things seem quite bleak, but it's only a year left, guys. You know, the war's over in about a year's time. And
yeah, you guys practically won it.
But they kept talking about how things are looking really grim, and I'm like, what year is this? And I checked, I was like, oh, it's 1940. Oh, they're a year in, and they were maybe thinking, this will be one big fight, we'll go home. Because that same thing happened with World War One, where everyone said, like, the quote that was passed around in World War One was, we'll be home by Christmas. That was like, when everyone was leaving in 1914, they thought it'd be home by Christmas. And that was a 4-year war. Obviously, World War II, a couple of years longer than that. So, yeah. So, yeah. But that's all war stuff. We'll get into, obviously, the movie. Typically, we say we start spoiler-free, which we will. There's definitely things we'll keep out of the conversation until we're officially in spoilers. But obviously, the larger context of what happened in the world isn't really a spoiler, per se.
Yeah, this is... specifically all of the characters in this, while potentially, like, there's nothing to say that they didn't exist, they are fictional characters.
Yeah,
they were made up for the sake of this story.
It's got a very specific structure, and that just kind of necessitates that he's got his own characters to play with. Now, were there characters like all of these characters at the time? Probably lots. Yeah. They're probably basically just amalgamations of a lot of real people that did exist, but they're not specifically based on anyone. So, yeah.
Except for Winston Churchill at the end. He's the only one.
Well, to be fair, you hear what he said. You don't even see him or hear him, specifically. Yeah. So, yeah. So, I mean, so Dunkirk is, it's this kind of, it's a shorter film from Nolan. It's about an hour and 45.
Which last night I was like, all right, I need to wake up early enough to watch all of Dunkirk. And knowing Nolan and how his movies have just progressively gotten longer, I was prepared to have to wake up super early today to watch this. And then I go on to IMDb, hour 45. I thought I was on the wrong movie for a second.
Yeah, it's and part of that is because it is just a sequence of like tense war scenarios, and it's a ticking time clock effectively till the end. It's not a movie with like a big grand plot that there's not a lot of exposition because it doesn't need to have much exposition, and we can get into all that. But you hadn't seen this before.
I had not, and honestly, I feel like I had seen clips from it prior to this, but having watched it now, I don't think I had either seen clips. I think I may have mixed it up with 1917.
Ah, yes,
as the clips I've seen.
Which, for the record, great movie. I recommend 1917. Very good.
We'll get to it.
But yeah, so we'll get into it. I'll start as we always do. David.
Well, hold on. You said that I've never seen it before. Pete, what's your history? Have you seen this before?
I saw it when it came out. Yes.
And you sat down and you loved every moment of it? Every heart-racing minute?
I was conflicted. I'll get into it in a minute. Well, I'm asking what you think first. How did you feel about Dunkirk?
So, I didn't really know what I was going into. I didn't know. Obviously, war movie, got that much. This does have a little bit of that Nolan flair with how the story is told in terms of out of sequence. And I think that it does it very well. I do think that unlike other movies, though, this one I lost track of a lot. It's an issue where everyone, by almost necessity, is wearing the exact same outfits. And there's a bunch of characters in this who look pretty damn similar. So, all things considered, I really had to focus. And occasionally I was still losing track of like, wait, I'm sorry, which one are you? Were you the one in that earlier scene? And then we cut to a different part of the timeline and I just start getting a little bit lost. By the end, I think I have a good idea of it. But in the moment, I honestly think it's probably one of his weakest in terms of telling the narrative. I feel like I got lost, even more than Tenet, which is saying something.
Which is wild because this is like an account of events that happened. It's not some complex science fiction thing that's...
Right, exactly. But because it's an account of, and he's still applying this weird narrative to it, the events don't specifically structure themselves to this varied timeline. Anyway, all that to say, I think this movie sets out to do a very tense war film because obviously the events in question are very tense. You're just sitting there waiting for a boat to come pick you up, more or less, and it's terrifying. And this movie does a great job of just filling every second with that tension. But I do think that it is one of the weaker narratives being told. So kind of split, I guess, is the roundabout way of saying it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I was, like I say, this film was a big fan of Nolan. I was excited about it. The trailers look good. With the slight linger in the back of my head that I can be very hit and miss in war films depending on how they do things. And I just said that I loved 1917, and I did, and I've loved other war movies, but there's definitely some that I don't love that much either. Basically, I would say that I don't just connect to it because it's based on a real tragedy or based on a real thing. I hated the movie Fury with Brad Pitt that David Ayer directed. Like, I did not like that at all. Just as another example, but so going into this, it was like that was just kind of like a wild card element to it for me. But obviously I like Nolan. Trailers look good. Let's get into it. And I found myself like, okay, I'm drawn in at the start. The cinematography is good. I'll say this: the technical qualities throughout are obviously top notch. There's a lot of practical effects as much as it can be. Like you say, it's very tense. It looks beautiful. A lot of it's shot in IMAX. Depending on how you watch it, you might see a lot of shifting aspect ratios. Probably enough that it's a little bit distracting, because it is darting around so much. But technical qualities are super up there, and you'd expect them to be with Nolan. There's nothing fault there, but what you criticised there a little bit, or had mixed feelings on, was the narrative of the movie. And I guess my complaints also come from that, and more specifically the characters, and the lack of characters that I really find myself able to get attached to. The guy that we start the film with, whose name I never learned. Apparently he's Tommy, according to IMDb. I don't think I ever heard his name once in the whole movie.
I'm sitting here on the Wikipedia page where there's just a nice little cast list, and I have to go into each and every one of these actors' articles to know who in the hell we're talking about.
Yeah. And we start with him, so he kind of feels like the main guy to a point. Obviously, the ones that starts jumping around the 3 timelines that we're playing with, building up to where they all converge. It's kind of an ensemble where you're kind of on the George boat, as I'm going to call it, because that's what I think of it as. Because the only name that I heard this whole movie was George, because he kept saying, "George,
yeah,
come on, Georgie boy, get in the boat." Right? There's a lot of that. But I had this trouble where the character who felt like he was the closest to a main character for the first 10 minutes. I kind of, like, over the course, it felt like he became less and less something I was focusing on, to the point where I literally kind of lost what happened to him and his group of characters at one point until they just kind of turned up again. And I was like, I'm not really sure what the transition was from that previous predicament to this, other than just what I can assume based on what's going on.
Was it them going off the sinking boat? Was that where it was?
Two then, because that, and also when they're getting off the other boat on the beach.
Yeah.
That's filling up with water.
All those moments, I'm just sitting there like, I feel like there's a shot somewhere in one of the other, because that's, I guess it's not spoilers to explain how the different timelines here work.
No. So it's very simple. It's we're introduced to soldiers at the beach first, right? And there's a little bit of build up getting to the beach. But once we get to the beach, it's like, okay, this is the mole, which is this pier at this Dunkirk beach. And it's basically the only place they've got to actually have bigger boats come in and take them back to the destroyers or whatever it may be. They can't they can't sail anything else up close to the beach. And it comes up saying the mole 1 week, right? And you don't really know what that means immediately, right? But then you're introduced to it's Mark Rylance's character, Mr. Dawson, his son Peter, and George, who's like a friend of the family, this teenager.
Itty bitty George.
Yeah. Barry Cohen, who looks kind of like Ezra Miller, but he's not Ezra Miller.
It threw me for a minute there.
Yeah. But they are, his little, boat is like, okay, the army's coming in, the military's saying, hey, we need everyone's boats. And they're actually going to take it in themselves to go in Dunkirk. Whereas Mr. Dawson, and we don't really understand his motivation until much, much later, but he decides that he's going to drive the boat himself. They're going to go to Dunkirk and try and save as many soldiers as they can. And George, the teenager, jumps on, and it comes up saying, the sea one day. So it's the idea that this is, wherever we're ending the movie, the stuff on the beach started a week before the end, the stuff in this boat leaving is a day before the end of the movie. And then eventually we're introduced to Tom Hardy, who's a pilot in a Spitfire, and that's 1 hour before the end of the movie. So it's cutting between these 3 things throughout the movie, but as we're getting later in them, they're all converging to around the same time.
Right. And that's what once I understood how this was all happening, because I think the first time you really get any overlap is actually with Cillian Murphy's character. He shows up in the sea plot and then also shows back up in the land plot, the mole plot as well. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. He can't be in both places at the same time. These timelines aren't lining up properly.
Yeah,
so
I don't remember I don't remember my experience with because I got into this as soon as it said 1 week. I remembered, oh yeah, 1 week, 1 day, 1 hour, and for this entire viewing, I just knew how that was playing. I don't remember when it clicked for me the first time. I have no idea.
For me, it was the Cillian Murphy moment. There might have been other little hints before then, but that was the first time where Cillian Murphy's character in the George Boat plot is very different from where he was in the mole plot. And so that was the first moment where you realize, wait a minute, these can't line up. Oh, we're doing a thing with time. But it was because of that little shot that I kept on expecting, once we lost track of our main group of boys, that like I was gonna see a shot of them in one of the other plots, and they would all just suddenly click of like, oh, here's how they managed to escape that situation. But I don't feel like I ever did. And like that's why I agree in the losing track of them multiple times in this movie, where they have to cover a whole week in their plot, and it feels like there are some jumps in there that weren't properly explained.
Yeah, there's definitely some big jumps in the 1 week plot of the movie. Yeah, and I think, like you say, they're all wearing the same uniforms, obviously, which is, accurate, but they're all skinny white guys with similar hair, and a lot of them do look the same.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of them don't talk that much as well. That's the thing. Like, a lot of it's visual, which is good, don't get me wrong. It's great that it is just a visual set piece movie. But I think my other big problem with it is that it's super tense, and I remember my first viewing being into it for maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, and then the tension just never, like I kept expecting it to slow down so I'd get to know the characters better, and it never did. It just keeps going, and I think that can work in certain movies, and I think it can function, and you can get enough of the character across through these types of sequences. I think there's too many in this, and this is maybe more of a personal thing, but I'm not a big national pride guy. So there's a whole, when it starts, playing sappy music as like British flags are being waved at various points, I'm just kind of like, I don't care. Like that's more of a personal thing. But that sappiness of it, I'm just like, no. Like, I think what you need to do is make me really care about a character so that I'd be rooting for someone. Because as much as you can say, oh, there's 300, 400,000 men here and they're all going to die if they don't get evacuated, I need to care about one. I need to be given one that I know, that I learn to understand, get what their fears are, get what their hopes are, and, and I think when I look at something like 1917 and I'm like, that entire movie follows one character and we sort of like understand what he's avoiding throughout the film, what his arc is in the movie. And I don't necessarily, by its nature, this movie, the characters, like, there are some little arcs, but it's not really a movie about character arcs in the same way.
No,
it's not a traditional narrative in that respect.
I on the tension point, I agree. I know you're saying this is maybe your personal thing, but it's also for me as well, in that it's the first time we really get downtime, the first time we're able to just sit and like understand the characters without the score in the background telling you everyone is about to die, is 45 minutes into this hour and 45-minute movie. We're already deep into what should be considered the second act, and I think the human mind can only take so much of that ramping pressure before either it just gives up and assumes nothing's going to happen, or it just doesn't connect.
And it doesn't last long either. Like, very quickly. Like, I actually kind of let out a laugh this time. Like, how quickly another tragedy kind of strikes. Like, when you get to that downtime moment, it's very, very quick.
And that is the issue with it being stretched over a week, is that obviously you don't want to show the moments where nothing is happening, but you do have to show some moments where there is that like just chilling out. Because if we are to assume they spend a full 7 days just always at this level, I think that they should have then made that the core plot, the only plot, and the other two don't matter.
I think it would have benefited the characters in that week plot if we did just spend all the time with them. But obviously Nolan wanted to do these other plots, and I get the boat plot to a point. That does have a sort of little narrative, and it does make some points. I do think the plane stuff's my least favorite of the whole thing, though. I found it a little just repetitive, because you're just in the sky with like, oh, do we see the other pilot? No, we don't. And like it looks great, and I want to get this across. The big shots of the beach where there are thousands and thousands of people, and I'm sure as many of them are as extras as Nolan could get away with without someone saying no. After a certain point, they're CG. But like he's doing these big grand shots. He's got like people running around. You feel the scale. The scale is like unmatched, basically. Like obviously everyone loves Saving Private Ryan's opening, D-Day landing. And that's a very well shot and very like action-packed sequence. But this might even have a bigger scale than that does, just because of the way it's like this big stretch of beach. Obviously, it's not as action packed, and I'm not saying it compares in other ways, but it does. Like, there's a sense of like just the space, which is good. I mean, one of the things I guess I like about the movie is this idea of like how small this body of water really is, and how
Right.
it is just a day's like ride in a small boat from, you know, the bottom of England to get over to Dunkirk, and all the dangers that could be there in that space. It's almost 1 hour flying from, you know, England to Dunkirk.
That's the thing, is like the week-long plot, I feel like would have been done such a bigger service if they really did focus on the fact of just like how quickly they could get over there if they had any means of transportation, because they always keep on, like, as they are cutting back in this day-long plot and even the hour-long plot, logically we're supposed to know, okay, this is only taking an hour and this is only taking a day, but because it's interspliced with this week-long plot, it makes it feel so much longer of a trip than it actually is. And so you don't get this feeling that it is this tiny little body of water. The day-long plot of him sailing across this thing to Dunkirk feels like it takes the full week because it takes him that long to get there.
Either
over
that
the course of the movie.
or alternatively, the week-long one just feels like a day. It doesn't feel like it's actually a week. It feels like a day.
It just feels like 24 hours. They just blew through it. The only thing that separates that is that there are several night scenes.
Yeah. I do wonder if like maybe a Russian doll style thing would have been better, where you start off with the beach, you start off and you leave it in a big cliffhanger, and then almost like an anthology film, you cut to the boat stuff, and you do that for like a long time until maybe you can like and leave it in a cliffhanger maybe when they're about to see the planes, and then you do the planes, and you do all of the planes in one chunk basically, and then go back to the boat because it kind of bleeds back into that, and then that bleeds back into, like, you know, maybe that would have been a structure that worked more for me. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just.
I mean, I think at that point you're changing up the entire structure, which would have its own effects, but it does sound on paper like a better way, because the way it currently does it, it just doesn't feel like time means anything. By the time we hit the end where, I mean, no spoilers, but there are evacuations. They manage to get people off. But it's...
I mean, it's the real story.
Yeah,
so
exactly. But they have this thing where it's like one of the characters decides to stay back. And it didn't hit me. Like, it was supposed to be like this big emotional point where he's like made this hard decision. But I'm like, it feels like you could easily just get a ferry and just leave anytime you feel like. It doesn't feel like you're trapped here.
It feels, I mean, I said this last time, but I think it's Nolan's coldest film. I feel very little from it. I feel very little emotion.
Well, I think it does a good job because this is one of the only movies where there are no real heroes. Every single one of these characters is in self-preservation mode, and they are willing to do whatever it takes to be able to do that. And by necessity, that comes across as cold. The only person who I think kind of manages to escape it is Tom Hardy's character as the pilot, but that's only because he's pretty far removed from everything, all things considered. I
would also say Mr. Dawson, kinda.
True.
Because, you know, he's making the choice, and like there's multiple points where it's like, oh, you should turn back, and he doesn't, you know, so I feel like he kind of also gets that. I think the coldness is a part of it. You said that, you know, there's a moment at the end didn't hit you. I think I wouldn't say what's going on or what the characters have sort of realized or went through at that point. We'll talk about that in spoilers. But when we are hearing Winston Churchill's speech, I think all the points that we're making there with the characters fell flat for me. And not because it's not a valid thing to say that they might feel, or that this was even a real thing that they felt at the time or whatever. But more that I just didn't care enough about these characters, but it's basically just a case of like the thing that they're worried about, or it's introduced like 2 minutes before it's paid off, and I feel like you could have like teased this throughout, this worry about what it might be like when they do actually get home, kind of thing. Like, I feel like that could have been something that could have been like built the entire time, and because it wasn't, I just didn't feel much at the end.
Yeah, no, that's the issue with, because the core focus of the movie is that it is this, like I said, self-preservation thing. And so that's all that's focused on the entire time is, okay, we've made it out of problem A and we're moving in immediately to problem B. We don't get a moment to breathe. We don't get a moment to think about things. We just have to focus on living for every single moment. And so by the time that we get to the end and it has this chance to talk about things and explore themes and like, way, we're out of danger, it's the end of the movie. You're out of time to do that.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So, you know, I'm not sure if I'm like pleased that you ended up feeling quite mixed on it, but it's certainly reassuring that it's like, because part of me thought you were going to come in here and be like, oh no, I loved this. This was great.
I was kind of hoping I was. I really wanted to be able to come in here and be like, this is great.
It might have been a more interesting debate if you came in here loving it, and some people do love it.
Here's the thing. I will say, I don't think this is Nolan's weakest film. I do not believe that it is his lowest film, all things considered. I think that it is weak, but I would not put it at bottom of the barrel.
I mean, obviously, technically, I don't think it's the worst, but I think for me personally, it is the worst one. Like, it's the one that I just don't want to watch. I get more personal value out of every other film he's made versus this one. And it's the one that I've had no desire to rewatch it since it came out. You know, we're doing it here for the show because we're doing Nolan films, and we're not going to skip it, obviously. But like, you know, I don't really see myself wanting to watch this again. Like, I just don't think it's for me ultimately. Like, and I appreciate that he tried something different with this. I appreciate that he was flexing creative muscles. But sometimes when you flex creative muscles, it doesn't work out, and I don't think that should be condemned. Like, trial and error and trying new things are part of what make everything work. And it has worked for some people. Some people do love the movie, but so I'm happy that he gets to try these things, and I'm happy that he's doing different types of film. This one just wasn't for me in almost any way, sadly, and it's just kind of something I have to, you know, deal with.
No, yeah, I mean, I get that. I think for me, my biggest problem with it isn't anything to do with the story itself being told. It's specifically just how it's told. I think that I have a real problem with the timeline structure, and I have a problem with the fact of, like we're saying, it's so distant. All the characters, like, we don't feel like we really know any of them, barring maybe a couple in the boat. Even, like, you would think that the one that we get the most attachment to is the one that we're spending, like, ratio-wise, the most amount of time with. We are stuck in this cockpit with Tom Hardy. So you'd think we'd get, like, a whole thing on him, but I couldn't tell you anything about him by the time the story was done.
No. And it was almost like that was kind of the point. Like, it's like, oh, we're not going to get into these people's lives. We're just going to see, like, how scared they are and how much danger they're in, and, like, they're boiled down to just this. And again, I can appreciate kind of the point that he's trying to make by doing that, but fundamentally, you had to give me something from someone to really latch on to, beyond just the broad idea of saving the boys, the national pride of saving the boys and getting them home. Because
see, but I didn't even feel like it was the national pride, because very early on in this movie, Kenneth Branagh basically says, like, we're not getting much of anything. Like, we'll get their scraps. Like, the nation wants to save us for the sake of defending the homeland, but they're not going to not defend the homeland to save us.
That was an interesting pronunciation of Branagh.
Oh, Branagh. The wrong emphasis.
I just say Kenneth Branagh, but you
I thought that's what I said. Did I not say?
No,
that?
you had like a sort of weird touch there. Maybe you're more right than I am. I don't know, but I don't know. I know Matt loves to really emphasize that Branagh, but yeah,
I'll just call him Kenny. So Kenny did a good job. But no, like, that's the sort of thing though, where I think that there's not a real thing of national pride here until you get closer to the end of the movie. I feel like most of it is actually a fight against nationalism in a weird way, because very early on we see the English have sent over a boat to pick up soldiers, and basically the English officers are telling all the French soldiers, get out of here. You get your own boat. This is for the English soldiers. So it's actually played as a negative that they're leaving people to just die here on the beach because they're the wrong nationality, despite fighting for the same cause.
Yeah, no, there's definitely that as well. There's definitely that coolness. But I just mean more like the way the characters keep talking about home, there's a lot of like little things, particularly later on, that feel like it's dipping more into it. It's like, okay, forget about all the bullshit. For like, I almost would have liked it more if it did make more of a point of like confliction, where it's like, okay, like, maybe you could say it's more this critical look and a cynical take on okay, it's all about national pride, because it makes everyone at home feel good that we got saved. But that's actually a little bit of just a facade, and really it's about making themselves feel better and not feeling guilty about anyone who didn't make it. And like you could have dipped into that and the politics of Churchill and like his statements and what he wanted, but I mean, Nolan was on record of like, no, we're never going to show any of those big decision makers because we don't want to get into the politics of it all. We want to just be, you know, boots on the ground. And I agree with the decision not to like have those scenes with those characters, but I still think you can, like, I think it'd have been more interesting if these characters that are in the film, if what they went through was saying more definitive things or maybe questioning more definitive things about this.
Yeah, I think it's an issue where, because everyone is so focused on their own survival, I don't really feel like anyone has opinions on anything. Like, sure, they're all upset that they're not able to do things that would give them their survival, but I don't feel like there's a spoiler, but there are two characters in this main... Wait,
are you going to say the spoiler?
I'm not, okay. But there are two characters in this thing, and one of them has this big old secret the whole time, and once it's revealed, it doesn't change anything. Nothing in it changes for any discernible purpose. In fact,
not only that, the character kind of, like, I feel like I missed where, like, because they sort of just...
I can tell you what happened to him, but that's a spoiler. So.
No, I know. I mean, I'm just... Like, I feel like I missed something there. I feel like it didn't matter that much, ultimately. Or it didn't weigh down on anything for the rest of the movie. I don't know. It's a bit weird. All right, so let's just say spoilers so we don't have to dance around things. I suspect this may actually be one of the shorter conversations we have, because I'm not sure how much I have to say about things. Like, so the character you were just talking about there, early on, our main guy Tommy runs into a quiet soldier who's burying someone, and I think even the first viewing, like, I immediately just kind of like, I think he took that guy's uniform. I don't think he's a British soldier.
Well, it specifically showed that he took his boots.
Yeah.
That one is like immediately given. And I'm like, okay, you know what? If your boots are messed up and there's a dead guy with good ones, take the boots.
Yeah.
I'm willing to accept that.
But he's quiet the whole time. I actually recognize this actor now, funnily enough, because he was on 1899 on Netflix last year.
Okay. Still need to watch that.
Amusingly, I think he is German. But obviously, the twist later on is that he's like Harry Styles from the band thinks he's German, but he's actually French.
From the band.
From the band. I don't even know what band he's in. What band is he in?
It's One Direction.
Okay. I don't care about them.
I mean, if we're not going to talk about him that long, I do want to say he did a fine job here. I think for a non-actor jumping into this, he did a fine job.
I don't think he had a lot he needed to do, really. But yeah,
no,
like
not
what
really.
he's given, sure, he does fine with it. So that whole thing is like, and that was maybe the other thing as well. So this movie starts and Tommy is running, you know, in the little town that's near the beach, and he's getting shot at, and like it shows you that he's thirsty. It shows you that he's trying to take a shit and he can't find anywhere to take a dump. And it's all.
I really wanted that to be a running theme for like one full week. Tommy just can't take a dump, and he keeps trying.
But he runs from the soldiers. He ends up on the beach. He sees all the queues waiting for boats, and then he goes round to take a dump, and he runs into the quiet soldier burying the guy, and they end up sticking together. But from this point on, there's a really interesting thing here where they basically are trying to like almost cheat to get away. Where quite quickly they're like, okay, there's one like medical boat that's taking people back to the big ship at the end of the pier. And there's a queue, and like they point out in a later scene, there's hundreds of thousands of people here, so you're not getting on that boat. But there's some medical soldiers like running around with stretchers, and there's like one guy who's sort of still breathing that's lying on the beach, and it's the quiet guy who basically evokes the idea of, oh, let's take him, they'll let us on if we're carrying wounded. So sure enough, they have a stretcher, and it's all about kind of try to cheat their way on, which I'll say, like, I don't necessarily blame them. I get that he's scared, and I get that this is an awful situation, but it did make me think, I'm not more endeared to you for this though. Like, you're trying to cheat everyone else out and cut the line. So like inherently you're giving me a more of a slightly negative quality in this.
Yeah. No, I get it, but I guess at this point they've already shown the desperation for me. For me, they were like, all right, look, if we stay here, we will die. There is no honor in death in this regard. Like, every man for himself, more or less. So while it may not have endeared me to them, I also empathized. Like, I was like, no,
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
save your skin. I get it.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to point out, though, you were calling him the quiet guy already. I don't think our main character said more than 2 words up to this point either.
No,
like, everyone's just quiet the whole time.
That's true, but he talks later, whereas this guy doesn't. So he's the quiet guy. But they end up like hiding in like the beams underneath the pier because the medical boat actually starts to sink when it gets hit by something. So
well, the first thing that happens is they drop off the guy, and then people point out like, okay, you dropped him off, you can leave now, and they're like, do we have to? And then they climb down into the wooden ballasts of the pier beneath so that they can wait for, I guess, once the boat departs, they can jump onto it.
Yeah. So that's all going on, and then from there, like, they do get onto another boat.
Well, the first boat is attacked, and it starts to, like, almost sink at the docking station, and Kenneth Branagh just says, like, get out of here and sink over there. If you're in the way, we're all dead.
Yeah,
so he then reaches out and saves Harry Styles' life.
Yeah, that's where they meet him because he's climbing off that boat, and then they all end up on another boat, which is actually getting ready to leave, and they've got tea and like jam. Not even sandwiches, it's just like a slice of toast with jam on top. It's like they're obviously thrilled to eat it because they've not had anything to eat, but it's the most boring looking thing ever. But immediately the quiet guy is like staying outside on deck, and he's and like when someone else asks the main guy Tommy like what's up with your friend over there, he's like, oh, he's looking for where the exits are in case like things go bad again. And sure enough, this is where I laughed because like they're like 2 bites into their jam sandwich, and then the boat gets hit and they start capsizing, and there's water filling up everywhere, and we get another big I think this was the moment when on my first viewing particularly where I started to like lose it, where I was starting to like, I don't know if I'm feeling this right now, like I'm starting to feel a little distant from everything that's happening. So yeah,
it's an issue because as we describe it, it sounds like it's a downbeat moment. It sounds like it's a moment where everyone can relax, but because the one character is still so paranoid this whole time, and because of just how they're afraid they're going to be like caught out and stuff like that, it's not a downbeat moment. This tension still exists this entire time. And so you're still just kind of stuck waiting for that. Because also, I think as movie watchers, we have that sort of meta awareness where we're only 20 minutes into the movie and we're like, they're not going to escape yet.
Yeah.
We know something's going to happen.
But I thought, oh, maybe they'll get like halfway and they'll be attacked, but they're still close enough to the beach that when the ship does sink and they get off, it's like, all right, okay, everyone back to the beach. Like,
get out of here. Although this is the point that I was talking about before, where they swim over to a lifeboat that has Cillian Murphy in it, and he's like, the boat's too full, you can't get in, but don't worry, the water's warm and you got life rafts.
And it's notable that he's very like calm and upbeat, and he's like, don't worry guys, like the water's not too bad, we'll come back and get you, you'll be fine, which is a stark contrast to the complete shell-shocked like nature of him that we already saw in the other bit of the timeline, which we'll get to.
Not okay.
So this is kind of revealing, a lot of bad shit happens to him then by the time we get to him, which, I mean, I guess it does. I don't know if they specifically like focus on it enough for me to like get, this is where he's going through that horror that led to this. No. It's just kind of like, okay, all these ships are getting hit and all that in the background. Like, obviously he's involved in all this. They never really focus in on it that much, sadly, to really get the point. But and then when they get back to the beach, they end up just like running around a bit, but they end up teaming up with a group that are going towards this boat that's sitting on the beach, and they're like, but it's on the beach. Like, what good is that? And it's like, yeah, but the tide's going to come in and then it'll go. So this is just a rogue little group of military who are hoping to sail back on their own on this little boat.
Which for like 5 to 10 minutes of this movie, we have repeatedly, among multiple characters, them explaining how tides work. And I felt like going into it, just as a layman, I had a pretty good idea as to how the tides worked. But after everyone talked about it for so long, I'm more confused than I was going into it.
That's fair.
It's just the way they kept, especially because they had two characters that disagreed whether or not the tides changed every 3 hours or every 6 hours. And
but to be fair, though, the guy who said 3 hours is like, yeah, but I'm Navy.
Yeah, I'm Navy.
So listen to me. I know what I'm talking about.
But then another person in that little ragtag battalion says the wrong thing, like doubling down on it. And I was like, tide goes in, tide goes out. Can't explain that.
I think that's the point, though. Is I think that we've learned what the wrong thing is. So then when we hear him say the wrong thing, we're like, oh no, they're making a mistake. They're
right.
You know, I think that's the point. And then like some Germans, which by the way, we never see them on camera. Like the enemy is always this unseen force in this movie.
The most we get is during the airplane scenes, we do see
other planes.
Single enemy planes, but we don't ever really see the soldiers themselves, which I think is a good move. I did appreciate that.
No, I think it's a smart move. You see some out of focus right at the very end when they're taking Tom Hardy away, but that is very, very minimal. It's like you don't, like it's very like this is not a movie about talking about the enemy. Other than just the enemy exists and we're trying to escape them. Like this is never something that's trying to villainize the other side, even though the other side's Nazi Germany, and most movies are quite happy to villainize Nazi Germany. But so there's like some German soldiers taking target practice at the boat, and they don't know that this group are in here, but they're all just sort of like trying not to get hit with the bullets. But it's made these holes in the boat, so it starts filling up with water when the tide's coming in, and then that's when the big fight around the quiet guy who turns out to be French, and immediately like, oh, he's a frog, like throw him out. There's too many of us. We need the boat to float.
Which I think this scene is the only real moment where they do that exploration of self-preservation. Like everything else is kind of passively just like, oh, what are you willing to do to survive? But this is the only one where our main character has to explicitly say, like, I don't want to sacrifice Gibson, the quiet guy here, for the sake of us being able to escape.
Well, Gibson technically is just a name on the outfit. It's not really his name, but yeah.
He's credited as Gibson.
He is, yeah.
But I don't want to sacrifice him. Like, that's wrong to do. And they're like, okay, then you leave. And he's like, no, let's sacrifice Gibson. Like, that's the kind of examination we're getting where it's like, all right, when your feet are really put to the fire, are you willing to give up your own life in exchange for someone else?
This is exactly the sort of scene that I wish it wasn't intercutting with other stuff. Because it's intercutting with Kenneth Branagh, I think, at this point. It may be intercutting with the other like plane and boat stuff. And I'm like, I really wish it just focused on this so we could just get the weight of this choice he's having to make. It might actually feel like he's having more of a character moment. But I don't feel it. And then honestly, this guy, the quiet guy Gibson, I feel like they're struggling as the water's filling in, and they're it's up to their necks at this point, and he's kind of tried to grab the gun. Like I don't even think I noticed like how he actually ended.
He died.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised, but
there was a sequence where he was wrapped up in like a chain or something like that, and he was unable to free himself, and he just drowned under the water filling up the boat.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I mean, it was a dark scene, and again, all these people look the same, so you would have been forgiven to thinking like, oh, maybe that was Harry Styles. Oh, maybe it was literally anyone else in the battalion.
And honestly, the end of this part though, like, I don't feel like you really like get a chance to really notice where these guys are until they're being pulled onto the small boat. It's not until they're pulled onto Mr. Dawson's boat where I'm like, oh, there these characters are again. I recognize them again. Everything going on in between is just like all this other bigger action stuff where Tom Hardy's saving people with his plane and whatnot. So that was a big thing for me. I suppose here's a good point to go back and talk about Mr. Dawson's boat, or George boat, as we're going to call that
George
plot.
Boat.
Which is that George decides to go along for this trip even though he wasn't supposed to. He just jumps on the boat and they're like, okay, I guess you're coming then.
And it's George, I think it's Peter? Is Peter the name of
he's the son, yeah, he's the guy's son.
The other guy, yeah. And then Mr. Dawson is the other guy.
And at first it's mostly just them talking about what they're doing and whatnot. The first thing that really happens to them though is they come across some wreckage, and there's one soldier who's just sort of sitting on a sinking boat, and it's Cillian Murphy who they bring on board. I forgot he was in this, to be honest.
Same. So, as soon as I saw Cillian Murphy's face, I was like, oh hey,
I'm not surprised. Yeah, I was looking out for Michael Caine's voice. I heard that, but I was surprised by Cillian Murphy making an appearance. So they pull him on board, and he's shell shocked. He's scared. And the big potential, which again I thought was going to be like everything they introduced in this movie, I thought was going to be a bigger deal, but he's like, oh wait, you're heading towards Dunkirk. No. Go the other direction. Back to Britain, please, because I don't want to go back.
Maybe you're unfamiliar with shell shocked, but that is not going to be okay for me.
And there's a whole sort of tense thing where the son Peter makes the choice to lock him in the cabin down below deck.
He vaguely makes some threats of I'm not going back there, which makes him think that he's going to try to take control of the boat. So
he locks him in, and when he does realize he's locked in, he tries to get out. He's sort of banging around, but then it turns out he's climbed out one of the little windows that are in there anyway,
the skylight,
and he ends up struggling for the wheel, right? And they're having a bit of a struggle, and in the struggle, George, who's been presented as this timid guy who wants to help, gets knocked back down the stairs and hits his head. And he's pretty seriously injured. He's shaking. He can't move. He can't see
blood
anything.
Out of the back of his head.
And this obviously makes Cillian Murphy's character, once he sort of realizes that this kid's hurt, he starts feeling quite bad about it. He's sort of sitting off to the side, and it's kind of meant to be the linchpin of this plot is that he keeps asking, is he going to be okay? And at first Peter's like, no. But then when it's he's probably dying, there's probably nothing they can do for him.
No, he's already dead at that point.
Not the first time he asked if he's okay.
No, the first time he's asked if he's okay, but he tells him the truth and says no, he's not going to be. It's only once he's dead and Cillian asks again.
That's what I'm saying. I said when he's still alive and he thinks there's maybe a chance to survive, he says no to him. That's what I was getting at. Yeah. Right. It's not until after he's dead that when Cillian Murphy asks, how's the boy? Is he going to be okay? Where Peter kind of realizes that he needs to hear yes. This is not about making him feel bad. This is about making him feel better now until he can process this.
Obviously you didn't mean it, and maybe you'll have to face what you did later on, but right now it wouldn't help anybody if you collapse down and break because you killed a young boy.
So obviously that's the tragedy of this story. It's meant to be the pulling at the heartstrings of it, and I'm not going to say I feel nothing for it, but I also I don't know how effective I think it is.
I think it's the same issue that runs across in the main plot of we know George's name and we know that he's, eager because he jumped onto the boat, but I couldn't tell you a single thing about him other than that. And so when he dies, it's that's awful that a young boy died, but I care about it because he's a young boy, not because he's George. I have no connection to George as a character.
Yeah, they're going for this thing that he's eager to help, that he wants to get involved in the fight, which I think a lot of young men who are just under 18, which because last week we say young boy, he's I think he's maybe 17 or whatever, but it's hard to get a good hold in that, and then of course it intersects with the plane stuff where we already saw the Scottish pilot, him go down helping Tom Hardy. But here we see the rest of it where they actually get to him in the boat and they help him and he gets on board. So he's kind of the more level-headed guy. And there is a difference between him and the regular infantry, because at the end of the movie, the ones who he helps get on the boat when they're helping everyone and helping save them, they're obviously all fine with them because he's just helped save their lives. But when they get off the boats at the dock back in England, there's another infantry guy who's kind of oh, where were you lot? He gets a little bit confrontational with him.
It's one of those things that come back to the captain on the Titanic sort of thing, where it's you should not be one of the ones to survive. If we see you around, you clearly weren't doing your job properly. Because either if you're, especially on this boat, if you manage to land your plane and come back from fighting, sure, whatever, you did your job successfully. But if you're coming off of this boat, that means that you did not defend properly, and the soldiers see that as kind of a negative, all things considered.
I don't think I read it that way. I read it more as they felt like they were abandoned out on that beach, and no destroyers, no planes were coming to help them. In fact, at the end when Tom Hardy's there helping them, he's the only plane on their side that's helping and trying to deal with things. I think I took it more as they felt abandoned by all the other branches of the military that should have been shown up to help them, and this moment was simply like letting out of that frustration.
Just lashing out.
Because
That's fair.
Because to be fair, this guy did fight. His plane went down, and the only reason why he's not dead is because this small boat was there to come over and help him out. Like he thought he was sacrificing himself effectively in the moment.
Yeah. Well, no, he very much felt that he was just gonna like chill out on his plane for a while, but then because we can't go 5 seconds without any sort of tension, he's unable to get the I guess the cockpit window open.
But only because he's went down in the fight, like not because he's made a choice to sit it out. Like he gets shot down, and he's able to land the plane well enough in the water, right, when he's shot down. But this isn't something where he's chickening out and not getting involved. Like he's done what he can. His plane's dead. He's there.
No, I agree. I agree.
So yeah.
I mean, again, as soon as we're done with the part where they pick up the pilot, I don't feel like the boat plot is really a centerpiece anymore. Like, we get the part where George actually dies, and they show how they go around and pick up people from a destroyer that was hit by some torpedoes or something. But overall, it just kind of feels like, at this point, there's a bunch of small boats all coming around. The cavalry's arrived.
There's a big moment where Kenneth Branagh's like looking through his binoculars, like, look at that. What do you see? I see home. And then it's all these little boats with British flags coming in. And it's been this big save the day moment. They start helping out. And the big set piece towards the end is that they're pulling soldiers onto the little Mr. Dawson boat. But all the soldiers are covered in oil. One of the ships that's went down nearby is leaking oil into the water. So there's this kind of tension where if something goes down and ignites that oil, if let's say a plane goes down and crashes there, which it eventually does.
What are the odds of that?
It's going to be set alight. We have to move from here as quickly as possible. So that's kind of the ticking time clock. But Cillian Murphy's chipping in, helping people get on board. The soldiers are respectful of George because Peter's like, no, you treat him, you be careful with him. You don't just throw him to the side. He basically, and he's got his little bit at the end where he goes to the local newspaper because he wants people to hear what George did in the effort. Which I hate to be cold here, but it's not really that much.
No, I
like he jumped on the boat where he wasn't supposed to, and he got himself effectively killed by doing so. Like, what did he actually accomplish between getting on the boat and being knocked out from being pushed down the stairs?
I understand what you're saying.
He achieved nothing. He's a loser.
Okay, that's a bit much. Like, it's about intention over what he actually did. He wanted to go in, he wanted to help, and he did what he could, and he died on a heroic mission. Maybe not doing something heroic himself, but in a mission that would have been heroic. I guess
he's the kid that the dad says, okay, you can help by holding this thing, but the dad's really doing all the work because the kid's too young to actually do any of the work that's being done.
He's holding the flashlight.
Yeah, it's basically I'm intentionally being extreme here for the comedy of it, right?
Yeah.
I get it. He's brave. He wants to help, and his good intentions led to his demise because war's a bad thing and bad things happen. And the fact that it was like a knock-on effect of one of their own men who's shell-shocked rather than just an enemy, troop who shoots them or an enemy boat that hits them or whatever it may be. It's one of their own. This is like more like a knock-on effect of the tragedy of war is how it sort of spread back to him. Like, I get all that. All that's fine. But I fundamentally just think that I need more time to develop these characters to actually care about them, whether we're focusing on the boat plot, whether we're focusing on the beach plot with all those guys and the horrors of war. Because the whole thing builds up to the end where they are getting home, they're looking out the windows of the boat, and they can see, it wasn't Dover, it was somewhere else, but they're seeing places down at the bottom of the UK, and they arrive, and it's right around here where all of a sudden Harry Styles starts talking about how, we're going to be seen as failures. We lost this war. We came out here to fight. They're all going to be ashamed of us. They're going to be spitting at us in the street. We're going to be hated. And of course, the surprise after they get on the train and they're kind of hiding and they're not really excited about anything, is that when they're arriving at this train station, people are handing them beer. They're cheering. They've got food ready for them, and it's all that, and that's when Tommy reads out the newspaper and he reads the Winston Churchill speech, which
I do want to throw out that this entire plot began because of the stupidest possible misunderstanding, where as they are exiting the boat, making their way over to a train, there's a guy there at the dock who's like handing out blankets and stuff for them and like, oh, good job, boys. Good work. You did it. Good job. Good job. But he's not looking at any of them. And Harry Styles takes note of that. And it's only our main character, once he comes up, he discovers that the guy is actually blind.
Yeah, that's why he's not looking up at anyone. Yeah.
And so when Harry says it on the train, he's like, that guy wouldn't even look us in the eye. Main character's already fallen asleep just due to exhaustion, so he's not able to clarify. And that's what causes Harry to stew on it, of like, oh, are people hating us because we failed coming back? But like, the fact that it was an actual blind guy just seems so contrived to me. Like, the fact that it seems like the sort of thing that's written for like a sitcom plot, where it's like, oh no, I can't believe I didn't know this guy was blind the whole time. Like, it just seems so contrived to me that that's what sent him down the spiraling rabbit hole of, oh no, people don't like that we came back alive, more or less.
I don't mind this idea that he's got this fear. I just wish it was something that was built up. Like the idea that they feel ashamed that they didn't come over to France and just win, right? And they're coming back as losers, effectively. That's not how they should be looked at, but that's how they feel. Like, if that's what they were, wanting to tell a story about, and this idea that they're being cheered as heroes when they get back, but maybe the sad, like, cynical part of it is that, like, the cheering to them is going to feel fake because they don't feel like they actually accomplished anything, and that's its own little kind of can of worms of like the psychology of it. Like,
it's like, don't pity me sort of stuff.
Yeah, like there's things there to explore and ideas that I think are good, but all of this it's introduced quite late on. It's these last like 5 minutes basically where all of this just kind of comes rushing in, and I don't. And yeah, maybe you're saying that when they're over there just trying to survive, and it is just about survival, it is just the minute-to-minute tension of trying to not die. They're not thinking about what it's going to be like to get back home because they don't have time to think that. Like, I get the logic of that, but maybe that's just, again, a case of like more quiet moments where, like I say, we thought maybe if they didn't just immediately get the boat sank when they thought they were going to be leaving, maybe if they were on that boat for a couple of hours and they had a chance to think, oh, maybe we're safe now, so maybe we can start talking and thinking about life back home, and maybe that can open up some of these ideas earlier or something. I don't know, but everything at the end just kind of felt a little bit hollow to me because I don't think any of it was spent in the movie building up to those conversations or those ideas. It feels all just kind of out of nowhere at the end.
But again, it's because they had zero time in this movie. That's going back to the very first things we were talking about. I came into this movie and I saw it's an hour 45 and I felt relief that I wasn't going to have to like wake up early. I think this is one of the very few that like really could have done with an extra, even like full hour to explore these themes, to get into their headset, to like understand where they're coming from and how they feel about returning home. Because with what we got, there was no time outside the tension to explore any of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. He made the choice, Nolan, to make this about the minute to minute, like just try to survive, almost thrills. It's the tension and thrills, right? The movie, that's all it is. And I feel like it's lacking anything else to give it any more emotional connection or depth. And the annoying part about discussing movies like this is that I do think a certain number of people will say, because this is about a real war and these things really happened, you don't have to set all these things up. Like, all these things land at the end because if you care about, again, the country or whatever, like, or you care about what happened to these people. I'm not saying I don't care about what happened to these people. What happened to soldiers in World War II and World War One, or it's all awful. Like, war sucks. It's terrible. But I'm watching a movie and I need to connect to these characters on a personal level. That's how storytelling works. Like, I've said it a million times and I'll say it a million more. If you just tell me that everyone on Earth is going to die when an alien blows up the planet, that's fine, but I need to care about at least one person who's on the planet to give a shit. And the same is true in a war movie. I need to care about someone. I need to care about why... Not why they're scared, because obviously they're scared because of dying, right?
Well,
but
I think that's one of the things in World War II that you can do without any effort is World War II is one of the few storytelling narratives where you can give a villain without having to define why the villain is bad. Like, you can just come into this and say, Nazis are bad, and everyone will be like, yep, I agree. You don't have to convince them. By the first time that we have the German planes coming in over the beach, like that, you hear them through the clouds first, and then you see them, it's menacing. You don't have to tell us why it's menacing. We get it. Like, it's automatically there. So from that point of view, you don't have to give that much backstory. Like, we just, as a culture, accept it. But we do have to understand, like you're saying, why we care about the people we're following. If we were in the war room, as we've said time and time before, we would have a general sense for why we should care about the military as a whole, because these are the people who run the military as a whole. But we're not following them. We're following an individual soldier on the ground, and we need to be told what they feel, how they are in this, and why we should care about them.
Yeah, and I wish it was more that. I wish it was, like, keep your 3 timelines, maybe you restructure it a bit, but I do wish that it was like, okay, we're going to spend and get to know this one main character, Tommy, and his struggles throughout this. And like I say, more time to actually explore him and develop him and make me care about him. Same in the boat. Make me care more about these characters. And maybe for the plane stuff, like if you're keeping that, then maybe you hold off on it till later, so you're not spreading it out throughout the film. Or maybe you even like show me them before they get on the planes. Like maybe part of their story is like waiting for the call, because they know they're going to have to go out and do something, you know, so they're almost like firemen waiting for the alarm to go off. Like, when do we actually like suit up and like go out on and fly? Maybe they're frustrated that they aren't helping and doing more. You know, because they keep saying how all the planes and destroyers have been held back and they're not helping all these people try to get home. You know, maybe there's a reason why just this group of 3 planes are sent out. Like, maybe there is more to that could be interesting to learn about.
I mean, that's, if we're going to talk about the plane plot, that I think is the coldest plot of them all.
Yeah,
there is not a single ounce of humanity over the course of the entire plane plot. When people go down, they're just like, oh no, all right, moving on. Like, it's very militaristic, obviously, but it's very cold in the way that it's presented to us. Not in a bad way, but even when we get to the point at the end of this movie, and there's this whole running subplot of Tom Hardy is out of fuel. He's running out of fuel. He has no idea how much he has left, and he's just coasting on fumes for a while. And then there's this big hero moment, the only big hero moment in this whole movie, where a German plane is about to come down and attack these people right as all these tiny little boats are coming up. And Tom Hardy shoots them down. And everyone cheers. And I still don't feel like Tom Hardy felt a single thing in that moment.
It's also because he's got the mask on the plane. He sounded a little bit like Bane sometimes, and that was giving me it was like, yes, I will destroy Nazi Germany.
First time we saw Tom Hardy, he was flying that plane, and I didn't care about him. I only cared who he was once he put on that mask.
Very good, very good. You think the clouds are your ally? The sky betrays you because it belongs to me. I
would kill for that cut. That'd be a beautiful line.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I mean, I guess the one thing about his bit at the end is that he swoops in and does some saving, but that big heroic moment you talked about, he's already ran out of fuel. He's literally just gliding for his last little bit of his trip. And he shoots down that last plane whilst gliding with no fuel. So it's kind of especially impressive to an extent. But yeah, I agree. Like, it goes for kind of this more grandiose spectacle of it. You know, everyone cheers and it's kind of this like hoorah moment. And I think at least for me, like, a more personal, emotional connection would mean more to me than just the fanfare, I guess, of it. The fanfare doesn't work for me, but caring about something specific, an emotional beat of a character, is what I get more into. And that's not to say that I don't want the tension. I do want the tension. Like, a good, again, that 1917 is the one that keeps coming up because it's like the war movie that I saw. It's the newest one that I've loved, right? And that movie is tension, and it's also very filmmaking kind of savvy, because it's, you know, it's done all as if it's a one-er, which is, again, it's not the same as what this movie's doing, but I'm saying they both have kind of a structural gimmick. They both have like, this is how we're going to tackle this story. And I wish that I cared more for some of these characters. I really do. It's the biggest failing of the movie, and I think perhaps almost equal to that is that I just kind of stopped caring by the halfway point about all the tension, because you become numb to it. I just got numb about everything that was going on.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
I do find it interesting now that I've seen this, knowing that the next film that he does is Tenet, and he specifically goes out of his way to not name the main character for that entire movie. I wonder if that was kind of like him proving to himself that he could do it. He was like, okay, my last movie, I had main characters, but I didn't really let you connect to them. This movie, I'm letting you connect to a guy, but you'll never know his name. I wonder if that was just a little extra thing he was trying to do there.
I don't mind not knowing a name. There can be a charm to that in the
Right, but a name is just the easiest way. Like, again, we called it the George boat. Even if we weren't connected to George, we at least had that, we know his name. It's the easiest way to build a camaraderie.
Yeah. What's Tom Hardy's name? I bet you don't know it without looking.
Hold on. The guy said it numerous. It's Farrier.
Oh, damn it! You got it. Okay.
He said it numerous times.
I couldn't have told you that. Like, I only know it because I was looking at it.
Yep, because that was once the second pilot was down on the boat, there was an entire sequence where Tom Hardy was like flying overhead trying to shoot down the German, and he just kept looking up, going like, "Come on, Farrier, you can do it. Come on." And I'm like, "Yep, he's gonna try, I guess."
Were you doing an English accent there for the Scottish pilot?
I was doing an accent. Don't ask me to define it.
Yeah, so one of the things towards the end is that it's revealed that Mr. Dawson had another son who was a pilot and died 3 weeks into the war. And it's kind of, basically it gives you like his motivation and why he's so willing to go and try and save as many people as he can, because he wants to. Yeah. So it's like, okay. That's a decent enough motivation.
Would have been a great reveal, I think, halfway through the second act. Of then we have to wrestle with that and come to our own different like things, but 5 minutes to the end, sure, why not?
Yep. Yeah, I don't know if I've got a lot more I want to say, honestly.
So the only things that I wanted to bring up was the very end of the boat plot is Cillian Murphy looks back and sees them carrying out George's body, and then as Peter glances over in Cillian Murphy's direction, he's already gone. So he's aware of what he did, and he is just left to the rest of the plot, more or less. Any thoughts on that? Because honestly, I feel like I wanted a little bit more from him having to come to terms with the fact that he did kill this kid.
Again, it wants to keep its distance, the characters from us. I think the idea of him disappearing into the crowd, I think it's playing into that idea that when you go to like war and like all the other soldiers you end up being in your squad, like they're all from all over the place. You don't necessarily, unless you make a point of getting to know them and want to keep in touch when you get back, you're not going to. Like they go back to their lives, and I think that Cillian Murphy just like disappearing into the crowd is like, like you'll probably never see him again. And I guess we're left to wonder if he's going to be able to live with what he did, that he got some young man killed.
Well, as we later discover, he changes his name to Oppenheimer, and he moves to America, and he ends the war. Good on him.
Very good. Very good.
The only other thing is the very, very, very end, where we're getting the reading of Churchill's "We Shall Fight on the Beaches" speech, and he's reading it from a newspaper, and we're getting these shots over and over of like, oh, here's the ocean, here's all these soldiers' helmets left on the beach, and the music swells. It's big. It's a big moment as we end with this final shot of Tom Hardy's airplane on fire as he burned it so the Germans couldn't use it, and it fades to black. And then we get one last shot of Tommy on the train having finished reading the speech, and he just kind of reacts for a second, and then it cuts to credits.
Well, no, I mean, I get this. I think this is the point where we were saying how it could be critical of what Churchill's saying. I think this is him reading this hoorah speech about we're going to do all this fighting like it's heroic, and then this is him reading that and being like, what a bunch of bullshit. It's
That
basically
has nothing to do with what we just went through.
it's basically it's kind of the same as like the end of No Country for Old Men. In a sense, it's basically just him like reacting to that, and it's like he doesn't believe a word of what he just said. And I wish there was more of that. I wish there was more of the critique of that, but the movie just doesn't want to get into it, which is a shame.
That's the thing, is like this movie feels so, as you were saying, patriotic in a lot of ways, so much of that national pride. But when it really gets to the end of it, it's like, but war is bad. Like we shouldn't be doing this to begin with. And it feels like it's kind of trying to battle that in the last speech thing there, where it's showing all these grand images of like, here's what our soldiers went through. But I mean, war is bad. And it's bad that we did that in the first place. But like, be proud of them, but also don't be angry with them because war is bad. It's just a bit of a mess of a message.
Yeah, well, I think the idea is that Churchill's saying, yeah, be proud of all our boys, blah, blah, blah. But then the boys themselves at the end, he doesn't feel proud. Like, he doesn't feel like he's done anything worthwhile by the end of this. So I think it is an indictment of war, as I think every war movie ever made should be an indictment of war.
Okay.
Like, there should never be a war movie where it's pro-war. If that happens, then there's something wrong going on.
I really want to see if we ever reach the point where we go through the Jarhead series. Because the first one, I know for a fact, is that it's an indictment. It's them saying like, this is just stupid how we're spending the war. But then every later film is like, lock and load, let's go.
Although, now that I've said that, yes, I will acknowledge that if you go back to actual wartime, the movies that were being made to inspire everyone probably don't have an anti-war message. They're more propaganda, effectively, at that
propaganda doesn't count.
But typically speaking, war movies should be anti-war, and if they're not, then I may have a problem with them. So
the one thing that I just remembered as I was talking about that final montage was a bit of a weird moment. This entire movie, we've had this crowd of soldiers all on this pier making their way out to the mole and like the ships that are picking them up, and it's just before Kenny, he says that he's going to stay. There's just a random private that I guess fell asleep on the dock, and he wakes up and looks around, and like everyone has left save for Kenny, who's like, come on, private, get on the boat, you overslept. And I'm like, how in the hell did that happen? How did they just let this one guy sleep this whole time?
So they mentioned that Churchill was only like, we'll try and bring about 30 to 40,000 people back, and there's like 400,000 waiting. And then it turns out, no, over 300,000 got rescued and evacuated. And, that's true. I double-checked that figure. That is what happened, which is nice. Although I do wonder, did they make multiple trips? Obviously, the movie doesn't get into that, but I wonder if these boats all went back and forth a few times.
I mean, it's possible that the faster ones did. I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe it was like a relay system where like they met in the middle of the channel and they just kept on going back and forth.
Oh, dear. So, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like we've spent a lot of time explaining why it's not really working for us as well as it could or should. Yeah. But fundamentally, I do want to say that, technically it looks fantastic. It is immaculately edited. The sound design's very good, which is not something I'll necessarily say about a lot of modern Nolan films.
No, I had my headphones in the whole time because I've just started doing that with Nolan films because Lord knows he doesn't know what desk speakers are. But it sounded great. I understood what everyone was saying throughout. And I think that's also because the fact that there is so little dialogue. Like, you're able to understand what's going on just because of the things happening on screen. There's maybe 3 scenes in this movie that I think are purely dialogue driven.
Yeah. So technical qualities are great. Obviously, it looks fantastic. And like all of the practical elements of like shooting the way that he does do feel great. They feel big in scope. All that stuff is great. I just never really care all that much about these characters, and sadly, it makes it the least rewarding film of his entire filmography to me. Now that I've said that, we should point out we're recording all these episodes before Oppenheimer, even though our Oppenheimer review already been out a few weeks ago. We might hate Oppenheimer more. I hope not. I hope I love Oppenheimer. I'm looking forward to it. But so you never know. But with that said, I think we should rate Dunkirk. David, what are you giving it?
So like I said, I don't think that it is the bottom of the barrel for me personally, and this is just my opinion. I personally dislike Insomnia just a little bit more than this. It just doesn't work for me as much as other stuff, and that's just a taste thing. That's just what I want out of a Nolan film, and Insomnia definitely was the weirder one out of that. However, in terms of ratings, I still gave Insomnia like an 8, so I'm still gonna give this one like an 8. It's not that much farther above. It's on more or less the same level. It's just completely different in the way it executes things. So an 8, but for entirely different reasons.
I feel like you've not been positive enough to give this an 8.
I again, I like when I was watching it, the tenseness that they wanted to instill in me. I felt all of the big action scenes as they were doing that looked great. I felt this sort of feeling of fear as to what was going to come next, which I think was the main point. It's only once you come out of it and you realize, like, oh, I never really connected with any of those characters the whole way through, that you look back on it a little bit more negatively. But I think during the experience itself, I did enjoy it.
Yeah, 8 to me means great, and I don't think this is great for all the story and character reasons that we've talked about. For me, this is like a 6, and the technical qualities get it that high. The technical qualities get it there, but I can't call this good or great, which is what a 7 or an 8 would be, because I just don't think the emotional connection is there. I don't think the characters are that empathetic to me. I can't connect to it on that level. So because of that, and I think especially for a movie where I should care about these characters, it's a big problem. So. 6 out of 10 for me.
That's fair. I mean, I'm not going to argue the point. I think that it's something that is an issue. I don't think that not being able to connect is just something you can brush off, saying like, oh, it's a war movie. They're supposed to be just the everyman. No, that's not good filmmaking. I don't think I agree with that. But I do think that connecting with the characters is not a focus of it really until you get to the last couple of scenes where all of a sudden they throw on that thing of like, but will people not like us when we get home? It's like, well, that's not what this was about, Harry Styles. I don't care.
Yeah, but that's the thing though. I was so numb to the tension and numb to all the action by halfway through anyway that even that for me wasn't working that well in the back half of the movie. And I felt that way the first time I saw it. I felt it again this time. If anything, I felt it earlier because I kind of knew where it was going and how I felt last time.
I don't believe this movie's good on rewatches. I will say that straight up. I don't think this is a rewatchable movie. Once you figure out like, oh, okay, they all do this stuff, there's nothing to bring you back.
So yeah, sadly we end on a down note, but for the record, since we're at the end of our Nolan season here, I will point out, just sort of from rough memory, I love Nolan's Bat trilogy. That's even Dark Knight Rises, which people shit on, I think has a great central Batman character arc. Probably my favorite of the 3 films. Dark Knight's the best movie overall, don't get me wrong, for other reasons, but I love a lot of what Rises does. I love Interstellar. I love Inception.
Same.
I really like Tenet. It's got some rougher edges compared to those other films, but I still like a lot of what he's playing with.
I only ever watched Interstellar once, beginning to end. I don't remember it as positively as Tenet or Inception, which I have seen numerous times, but that might just be I need to go back.
Yeah, what I'll say is that I always liked Interstellar, but I was maybe a little... Like, I wasn't as in love with it as I thought I would be before I saw it, but I will say when I watched it again for the first time a year or two ago for Ace, I liked it more on the second viewing, knowing what it was going to be going in, and was able to sort of like take it on its terms, as opposed to Dunkirk where like nothing changed for me here.
Right.
So yeah, I'm just throwing all those opinions in there quickly here at the end, because we've done all the other Nolan films just to sort of wrap up the overall feeling.
I mean, for me, the big thing for me is this is the first time that I went back and I did Following, and I really sat down and did Insomnia. And even though I don't think it was either of them were his best films, Insomnia I did have the biggest issue with. I still think that would be the bottom for me. It's still great. It's still a good movie. Like, Nolan's weakest films are better than most directors' best films all throughout.
Yeah, I love like how like just rough Following as compared to stuff. Like, to me, it's more interesting than a lot of his not a lot, but like in some of his other films, you know, like
Right.
I think it's a fascinating little thing that I get way more out of watching that movie than I did Dunkirk. Like I'm one of the few people who probably says Following's a better film than Dunkirk, but I actually enjoy it way more. I actually think it's a way more intriguing, and it gets into my brain a lot better. Like I feel like I'm in the character's head. I feel like I'm sucked into the story in a way that I don't feel like I am with Dunkirk. So
That's the thing, is I think I go for Nolan more because of those sort of mind-bending aspects. Not that they all have to be Inception or Tenet, where the laws of reality no longer apply, but just, you're questioning things. You never know quite what you're getting out of it.
So,
and that's kind of what I enjoy about Nolan.
Hopefully we liked Oppenheimer. You'll already know if we did or not, but hopefully we did. And obviously he's a director that I'm always looking forward to his next film. I'm always looking forward to seeing what he's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. We'll see where he goes from here. And this was our first director season, so that's exciting.
Yes. Before we get too deep into it, though, we do still have to make does it make the cut?
Oh, of course, yeah. Maybe this is contentious, but I would say, I don't know what I'd say. I don't think it's a clean makes the cut. I mean, at best, I think it's cutting it close.
Yeah, I was going to come down there as well, because for me, making the cut and such like that, you got to take rewatch value into that a little bit, because if you want to collect a movie, it implies you want to watch it several times, and this, I don't see any reason to watch again, so I would say cutting it close.
Yeah, I'll agree with cutting it close. There's still enough technical quality there, although it's definitely a more lukewarm cutting it close for me than maybe others. So all right, there you go, that's that. So starting next time, I've been doing too much like upper class Nolan movies. Next season we are diving in to the Expendables.
Oh boy,
because there's a new one, Expendables 4 is coming out, so we're going to work through the franchise and cap off with 4. It should be a good time. Of course, you can get bonus content over in patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. We've got a Dolph Lundgren film all ready to go for the bonus to tie into Expendables. But of course, there's a catalogue now of about 10 bonus movies, something like that already.
Yeah, give or take.
Yeah. We did Illusionist to tie in with Nolan's season, because we did The Prestige, obviously, so that kind of tied in with that. Obviously, the $5 tier now, we can also get access to extra reels where we do so bad they're hopefully good movies, and sometimes they are, and sometimes they're very, very, very painful. So that show's proven a favorite among some of our loyal patrons. So check out that if you wish.
I'm so happy we agreed to do that for the foreseeable future, and I have to keep doing it forever and ever and ever.
To the point where some people are saying scrap the main show and just do extra reels every week.
Here's the thing, I already did that show on my own personal channel. I had a whole thing where I watched bad movies. I'm not going back.
Once a month is all we can stomach of things of that tier. But people have fun. We have a laugh talking about them. So yeah, obviously there's bonus content for other shows. So yeah, if you want all the extra goodies, you can go to Patreon and it'll help keep all the content coming. But that is the collector's cut. That is the end of Nolan season. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you for Expendables. And if that doesn't sound fun, then there'll be something after that you can enjoy more.
Always something new around the corner.
There'll be another director's theme season, which I can't tell you what it'll be because it's being voted for by our patrons soon. But there is going to be another director season in October, November time roughly. So look forward to that. But that is the collector's cut. That has been our thoughts on Dunkirk. Thank you very much for watching. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and what's that? What's that I see in the distance? Gary Busey?